What if the way that you experience your life right now could completely be changed without actually changing any of your circumstances? I find that whenever I don't understand the season that I'm in, that my perspective causes me a lot of pain and turmoil. But if I understand the season, then it changes the way that I perceive it, which changes the way I feel. And moving from a place of frustration or confusion or uncertainty into a place of peace, rest, and joy changes everything. If you don't know what season you're in, then you're going to have tremendous frustration. There's going to be so many negative emotions surrounding your season just because of lack of understanding and perception. So if you know what season you're in, then you'll know what you should be doing. And if you know what you should be doing, then there's so much less frustration. There's so much more peace and joy and understanding because you know what's going on. And if you know what's going on, then you can partner with God. And when you're partnered with him and you're aligned with his will, then you're going to be resting in his spirit. And where his spirit is, there's freedom. There's also the fruit of the spirit, which is love, joy, and peace. There's so much that can be gained from understanding the season that we're in. Recently, I went through a Psalms 23 season, and at first I didn't understand what season I was in, and it caused extreme turmoil. And if I would have recognized my season sooner, I could have embraced it more, and I would have had a total different experience. I have to tell you what I learned so that you can avoid the pitfalls. That way that you can embrace the season that you're in right now. Hi, I'm Jenny. Welcome to my channel where I help Christians close the gap between head knowledge and heart experience. You know, in Ecclesiastes, it talks about that there's a time to kill and a time to heal. There's a time to mourn and there's a time to dance. There's a time to plant and there's a time to uproot. There's a time to tear down and build up, a time to embrace and refrain from embracing. There's a time to be silent and a time to speak. If we're speaking when we should be being silent, it's going to cause us problems. And if we're being silent when we should be speaking, that's also going to cause us problems. Understanding our seasons and aligning with God's will for us is so crucial, but we can't do that if we can't figure out what season we're in. And so I want to help you figure out what season you're in. And some of the most practical things to do is to hear from God, because he's always speaking. The sheep know his voice, is what Jesus said. And so when we know Jesus's voice and we can align with what he's doing, there's so much more contentment and joy in our lives because we can enter into rest and trust. I recently went through a Psalms 23 season. How did I know it was a Psalms 23 season? Well, literally everywhere I turned, people kept saying Psalms 23, or I would, I'd open YouTube and it would be like the song Psalms 23, which is a great song. I highly recommend it, by the way. And then I went to a conference and someone walks up to me and they're like, hey, I just feel like the Lord says like that you should be in a season of rest. I literally reach out to someone I barely know on email and I'm just like, hey, can you pray and just seek the Lord and see if he has a word that he could give you about what's going on with me. And this person comes back and he's like, I hear Psalms 23 and that you should enter into rest. Guys, when I tell you 6 or 7 complete strangers told me that it's a season of rest or it's a Psalm 23 season or I should enter into rest, it was nonstop. It was crazy. It was so clear. And so first things first is that you need to be listening to what God's saying. He can speak through a lot of times multiplication, right? And so a repetition. And so it's maybe you read something in your quiet time that morning and it really stands out to you and you underline it or you think, oh, I like that verse. And so maybe you read something in your quiet time and then later that day you hear the exact same verse on the radio and you're like, whoa, that's a coincidence. Listen, it's not a coincidence. It's God. And then maybe you go to church that week and your preacher preaches on that same verse. God is trying to speak to you and he's trying to tell you something. And so when over and over again, when people were telling me to rest, I knew what God was saying. But on the other hand, I had traditionally been kind of very performance-based, kind of a workaholic. I enjoyed being productive and doing and getting things accomplished. And so to have everything ripped out of my hands in a season where I was just sat completely still, it was tremendously hard for me. Maybe over the years, I'd used all the things that I was doing for the Lord and for his kingdom almost as a distraction from actually dealing with the things that were under the surface. And so when I was still and there was nothing more for me to do, and literally everything was ripped out of my control and out of my hands to be able to do, I was left there in that stillness. I recognized that I actually struggle with deep places of trust. That yes, it can go like two extremes, right? Like one person can be like, well, I'm not going to say anything at all because I'm just going to completely trust God to take care of it. But then maybe God's asking them to speak and they're refusing to speak and they're calling that trust, right? And then there's the other end of the spectrum where it's like, well, I'm going to tell them everything because da 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 da, and this is the da 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 da. And that person is speaking when they should be being silent and trusting, just like it says there's a season to speak and a season to be silent. And in that speaking, they're not trusting God. I lean more towards the speaking than towards the silence. Go figure, right? And so in that, when you can know what season it is, you can align with God's will and you won't be operating out of his will. And that will keep you in a place of peace and out of frustration. Many times we can't actually change what's going on in our life. A lot of times we just really don't have control over a lot of things. We don't have control over jobs and situations and people like we wish that we would. But we can change our perspective. And if you change your perspective, then it changes what you're thinking and what you believe. And when you change what you believe and what you're thinking, it changes how you feel. And whenever you are feeling peace and joy and contentment and thankfulness, and you're able to enter into rest and to have grace and mercy, then you're aligning with the experience that God wants you to have. I'm not saying that we're not going to have hard times or that hard things aren't going to happen, but I'm saying a majority of the Christian life, even in the fire that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in, there was peace. So you can still go through really tremendously hard things. And when the Lord is with you and you experience his presence, you can have peace. And so, yes, as Christians, we're going to go through hard things and there's going to be persecutors and things like that. But that doesn't mean that amidst the hard things, amidst the cancer, amidst the job loss, amidst the death, that we can't have an overwhelming sense of peace and his presence in those things, even in the hard season, even in the season to uproot or the season to not embrace, the season to give up or to hate, as Ecclesiastes 3 says. And so when our perspective is aligned with God's perspective, then we have understanding, then we have peace. And sometimes we don't actually get understanding. We have to lean not on our own understanding and just choose to trust him anyways. 9 times out of 10, I find that later he will give perspective. Like, for instance, I really had my heart broken early in life. And it wasn't until years later that something really bad happened that I realized why that heartbreak had happened. And in that, I was able to trust God more. And it's like, wow, Lord, I, was so devastated with that heartbreak and it really hurt me. But now I see that you're protecting me from an even bigger heartbreak. And I see your goodness. I see your faithfulness in that. And so sometimes we just have to lean not on our own understanding and choose to trust him. And then later there'll be clarity. And whenever clarity comes, then that teaches us in the future, like, oh, we really can trust him and we should just enter into trust and rest and not be so obsessed with understanding. I mean, all of us like to understand what's going on, right? Like, we like the game plan. Uncertainty is one of the hardest things to experience as a human. And in uncertainty, it gives a tremendous opportunity to trust God. And trusting him is like such an exercise of faith. When Peter stepped out of the boat, that took a risk. That was not comfortable. That was not safe. And in that, he got to walk on water with Jesus. And so sometimes we step out on the water and we take a risk and we just lock eyes with him. And so the most important thing is to recognize where he is in the season, to seek his presence, to be aware of his goodness and to step into that and to trust it, and to deny the need for control, the need for understanding, the need for knowing the game plan, and be able to just enter into trust. Now, sometimes God does give us understanding when we are with him and when we talk to him and we meditate with him about a situation. Sometimes he shifts our understanding and helps us to see, or he sends, like he did for me, words from other people that are so multiplied, so repetitive that you can't ignore it, that he's like, hey, I need you to just rest right now. I'm going to lead you by still waters. I'm going to restore your soul. I'm going to be with you. And in that, it was like, I'm not going to tell you what's going on, but I'm going to give you instruction right now.
on what I want you to do. So when you know your season, you know when you're supposed to build, you know when you're supposed to rest, you know when you're supposed to grow, or when you're supposed to invest, or when you're supposed to plant, or when you're supposed to uproot. Not all seasons are the same, and all of them are morally neutral. Like, you can plant and you can also uproot, you know, you can mourn and you can dance. The thing is that you shouldn't be dancing in a mourning season, and you shouldn't be mourning in a dancing season. And so I think the more that we draw near to God, the more that we can align with what He's actually doing in that season. And then our experience is completely different. And when our experience is different, it literally changes our entire life. If you have trouble hearing from God, check out the PDF below where I walk you through how to hear from God through journaling exercises.